to order the state properties meeting to order. And I'm going to call on our secretary to do an invocation for us.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let's bow. Dear Heavenly Father God, I thank you for this day and for your many, many blessings. I thank you for the opportunity we have to work and to represent the good folks of the state. Lord, I pray that you will grant us wisdom as we deliberate today to make the best decisions we can for this great state. In your name I pray. Amen.
Thank you, Representative Perkle. Today we are going to hear two bills and or resolutions there, and they are our annual easements and property conveyances. And so we'll, if you have not signed up to speak and want to speak, it's down there on the front there. And we'll be dealing with Senate Resolution 228 and Senate Resolution 229. And Senator Jones is here to speak to the resolutions there. Senator Jones, we're glad to have you.
Thank you, sir.
Well, the mic is yours now.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I appreciate the opportunity to appear before your committee, and thank you, committee members, for giving us this opportunity. It is getting late in the session, and these are two annual, what we like to call in the legislature, cleanup bills that we need to get moving, and I appreciate y'all hearing us before the last week here. I am usually not the one that carries these bills, I have to admit. Usually it's my good friend Senator Jeffries from the 17th who usually carries these, but because of a particular piece of property, and I'm talking about SR 228, our conveyance resolution, it particularly is the main counties that are affected are Baldwin, Clinch, Crawford, Gordon, Lincoln, Muskogee, Seminole, Tattnall, Worth County, Bartow, Catoosa, Cobb, Coffee, Fulton, Gordon, Washington, and Whitfield. My county of concern is one that I represent is Baldwin County, and the interest there is the old, what we call the Central State Hospital property, which represents about 2,000 acres located on the Oconee River in Baldwin County, with the good work of Frank Smith and his staff and the local authority there. We have come up with a scenario in which since the closing of that hospital, the local authority has been trying to repurpose that property, which, as you can imagine, a facility that served as a mental hospital facility and really was its own city within a city for years, for decades. It has been a challenge to repurpose that property. And it's one of the biggest hurdles that they have had as an authority has been having to, every time they get ready to do something with the property, whether it be redevelop it or whether it be sell portions of it, they've had to come back to us or back to state properties and get permission, or either we've had to pass legislation. So this is us conveying this property over, which I believe is over a 3-year period process, will liberate them in being able to do what they think is best for their community with that property, and eliminate them from having to go through the red tape of bureaucracy and everything. So I'll be happy to answer any questions that might pertain to the counties that might affect anybody on this panel. But that is the purpose of me carrying this piece of legislation this year is because of the county that I represent in Baldwin. So, but I'm happy for any questions.
Thank you, Senator. I know that you and I visited through the area several, maybe 2 or 3 years ago.
Yes, sir.
When we were up there. And for those that do not know what we're talking about, we're talking mainly about the old Central State Hospital groups there and groups of buildings there. A lot of them are in disrepair. A lot of them are falling down. And so this is probably one of the best concepts that we have come up with to deal with that problem. And to the State Properties folks, we just thank y'all for the work that you have put in and done with this on that. Do we have any questions from the committee on Senate Resolution 228? Okay. Representative Representative Buckley.
Okay.
Buckner.
First of all, on page 10, doing something with the old farmers market in Muskogee County is just, we're grateful. Thank you. That needed cleaning up, and I hope that this will be a way to do that. So, and the state didn't need to own that mess. So, thank you for that. I do have some questions over on 13, and this is not in my district, but I have a real interest in railroads. I live in Junction City, which is the junction of two railroads, north and south and east and west. That's where the name of the city came from. And I went back to look at the railroad agreement that had happened roughly 50 years ago, and used to, that was required by law to be in this piece of legislation, and that law has changed, and it's not required anymore. And I realize from what I've learned that this is just authorizing state properties to enter into an agreement with CSX regarding this state property. But since that lease is not in the law anymore, there are some questions that I had, because 50 years is a long time and a lot can change and a lot can be different. And I know CSX does a wonderful job hauling freight, but if we ever wanted to haul folks, I wanted to know if there was anything that might preclude that from happening, or if we needed to make sure we were giving strong instructions that that was not precluded in the event we ever needed that, because it goes through so many populous areas that a commuter rail or passenger rail or something like that might be needed in the future. So my question is, how are we going to address that?
Is that on SR 229?
I thought I was looking at
229.
228.
Well, it's 229?
228
It's 228?
on page 13.
Okay. Well, I would have to defer to Mr. Smith here. I'd love to answer your question, but I'd have to defer to Mr. Smith on that because he knows more about it and did the negotiating along with CSX on that. So I'll
Thank
yield
you.
the floor to him.
Thank you, Representative Buckner. I would tell you that you are correct. There is no lease drafted yet, and you are right in saying that what this legislation seeks to do is authorize the Properties Commission to enter into negotiations with CSX to ultimately come up with a lease. What it includes in here is what we've determined as the key terms, meaning number of years, the rent, the escalation, and then additionally that we would receive 50% of any revenue generated from CSX subleases. So any term or revenue component we wanted to be sure to include in here. There are a number of terms that are yet to be negotiated, that need to be negotiated. I can tell you that the current lease, which was from 1969 and amended in 1986, does include the right of the state to explore commuter rail, and that we would seek to maintain those rights, the right to explore commuter rail in the future. It doesn't bind the state and it doesn't bind CSX. It says in the future, if it becomes a viable option, the state reserves the right to explore that with CSX. So while it does not explicitly say that here in the resolution, like it doesn't talk about a lot of other terms that we would have to negotiate, I would tell you that us and CSX, and we can get CSX to talk, but from our initial discussions, I think we would be in a good position to maintain that what's in the current lease, that we could reserve our right in the future to explore commuter rail if it became a viable option.
May I follow up?
Yes.
So after that agreement is negotiated, does that become an open document, a public document that's open for review?
Yes, ma'am. As soon as that lease is signed, that is then a public document. Until that lease is signed, then that's a negotiation that is not.
So, one more follow-up, and then I promise I won't ask any more. Well, I may, but with your permission. I guess if we were to try to come up with some kind of wording similar to what we already have in the lease and put it in the legislation, would that negatively impact the negotiations on the agreement with CSX in the department's opinion, I guess is what I need to know.
Thank you for saying in the department's opinion, because I can only speak for really only myself and can ask my boss to speak if necessary. But our fear, as Chairman Jones said, is being late in the session and trying to wordsmith language that CSX can be comfortable with and that we can be comfortable with, and to again amend this piece of legislation. We're fearful that it opens up many other terms that may want to be added on to this, and in our belief, these are the key terms, and others could be delegated to the Properties Commission to negotiate. So our desire is to keep it as is, but certainly the will of the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Smith.
Those were my exact questions I weighed.
Okay, all right. Representative Elam.
Senator, on lines 230 to 244, we're talking about the 5 acres in Doherty County. Did you by chance get an opportunity to discuss that with your fellow Senator Sims?
I did.
Okay, so she's happy with us, obviously.
Yes,
Okay.
she voted for it with a smile.
Okay, good. Well, super, because
Very happy.
yeah, we were very much in the conversation about that, and this is the way she wants it done. That's awesome. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Let me add that the negotiations for the CSX contract has been an ongoing process for about 18 months, and we're at this point now to give the State Properties Commission the right to do the lease with the passage of this. Information, or this resolution here. So it's not something that's been done over the last couple of weeks. This has been an ongoing process for when the former chairperson was doing this as well. And so this is the process that's been going on. Do we have other questions from the committee? Okay. I'm gonna, if you two will stay there, I'm gonna turn to, we have a substitute that we're doing for 228, and I'm gonna turn to our secretary, Representative Perkle, if you will speak to this right now.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If you will turn to SR 228 on your cliff notes, if you would, on the House Committee substitution. We have 8 additions that were not part of the Senate, but are important to us to get involved in this legislation. Involves Camden, Chatham, Doherty, and there again, Representative Elam. This in Doherty refers to the Career Academy that Senator Sims was quite pleased and happy to, with a smile on her face, showed. Okay. Fannin, Hall, and Houston counties. The Camden and Chatham pieces has to do with settling the disputes of ownership regarding there, and I think the State Properties Commission did a very good job in negotiating that to make sure the best interest of the state is taken at heart. The Doherty County piece, as I mentioned before, is part of the Career Academy. The Fannin County property has to do with the city of Blue Ridge. They actually deeded the property to the state in 1959. They quite frankly want it back, and we'll have to pay for the building that we added to there, but it's the Hall County is a bridge widening portion, and Houston County will actually provide us additional buffer for Robins Air Force Base and help us in our base realignment commission. So these are the additions, the House additions. They're quite favorable, Senator, and I think your fellow senators will find these amenable.
Fine by me, Representative. Thank you.
Do we have any questions of Representative Perkle on these issues? Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. We appreciate the work there. Let's go ahead and do 229 on that, and we also have a substitute to that.
Okay.
If you want
Want
to.
to be presenting now? I'm
Yes.
sorry. I apologize. 229, very similar, annual properties, state properties resolutions, and this is pertaining to, unless, I'm sure y'all have some more, I think 9 additional counties you want to add that will be, that are being rewarding easements for various items, and Blakely, Cherokee, Douglas, Evans, Glenn, Hall, Lawrence, Rockdale, Upson, and Walton County, along with some others that I think y'all have a copy of as far as the counties that pertain to easements for utilities, easements for rail, easements for various other things that they've worked out with these local counties, and be happy to try to answer any questions, or either have Mr. Smith here answer those questions. He'd probably be better than I.
Okay, thank you, Senator. Mr. Smith, would you like to speak to this?
I can speak individually to each easement, or if we want to go line by line, I might have my assistant director go line by line, or we can go over the house additions, or we can highlight a few, however the chair and the committee would like to.
Let's go over the house additions there that we're adding to this.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We do have 9 house additions. Baldwin, Chatham, Madison, and White all deal with easements for Georgia Power. Henry and White deals with the MCs. The Effingham was done for dredging purposes. We do have Fulton, which has to do with the reservoir and running a pipe. This is what is needed to run a pipe, and then the Hall County is certainly important for the Hall County campus underground utility lines, but it's very cut and dried.
All right, thank you. Do we have any questions concerning the substitute to SR 229? Okay. All right, very good. We still have some people that want to speak, and Neil, if you'll come up, which one are you speaking to, or both of them?
228.
228.
My name is Neil Herring. I represent the Georgia chapter of the Sierra Club. Sierra Club's very interested in public transportation. I grew up in Dalton on the W&A. It was the NC in St. L when I was a kid. I remember seeing my daddy come home from George Peabody College, graduate school, getting off the Dixie Flyer. So that's been part of my life, and I've kept up with it. And I actually was here when they did the lease the last time. Roy Barnes carried it for Governor Harris. And so I watched it closely, and that was the first lease that mentioned MARTA. MARTA had been created between the 2 leases, and I looked at, I got it online the other day and read it, and Article 11 and Article 22 are the provisions in the 50-some-odd pages of the existing lease that deal with the right of the state and Cobb County to use the right-of-way for passenger service and not necessarily the track, but the right of way. And of course, it goes all the way up through to Kennesaw and then on beyond. Kennesaw, of course, where the great locomotive chase began, but I think it's the part below that that's needed for public transportation, probably in the not too distant future. I don't know if y'all seen the Northwest Corridor project on I-75 at 575, but Cobb County is running out of space to put roads. There's just so much room out there, and they're filling it up pretty quick, and they're going to need additional transportation. So preserving that corridor is the interest that I have and the Sierra Club has. We want to make sure that that asset, which is an enormously valuable piece of property to the state, and it's probably the state's oldest physical asset. I mean, the state built the railroad in the 1830s and 40s, and it's really incredibly historic. It could be argued, I think it could be argued successfully, Georgia is the Empire State of the South because of that railroad. We made it possible to get into the Mississippi Valley from the Atlantic Ocean with that railroad, and it transformed this state, made us the economic power that we are today. And preserving that interest is very important. And so whether you add language or not, I don't know, but you need to preserve the provisions that exist in Article 11 and Article 22 of the current lease. Thank you.
Thank you, Neil. Obviously, you and I were both here when the last lease was done. Both of us were here, and I remember that period of time that Governor Barnes carried that for Joe Frank Harris during that particular time there. Who's 22? All right, Representative Perkle.
I was just going to make one comment on your. I don't think you'll even need a response, but if you're running out of room in Cobb County, there's too many folks. We have additional real estate in Turner County and District 155 that we'd like to invite the Cobb
I
County.
live in Wayne County, and Mr. Werkheiser will advise you that we have even more room than y'all do.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. But we're very selective about who we let in these counties. Do we have any questions from the group here?
I feel like I'm in a quandary. I mean, I trust the state properties folks. I don't want it to sound like I don't, but I also feel a real urgent need to make sure that we are taking care of the state's property, especially now that I know it's even more historic than I realized. And I don't want to mess up the deal, but I want to make sure that we are taking care and preserving that opportunity should the need arise. And I guess some kind of conversation needs to be held to say, I mean, could we add words not to require or preclude during the negotiations? I mean, we've added some other things to the bill. I wasn't going to push it, but when we added all these others, we've already adjusted the bill. So could we adjust it in this area to just make sure that we're not, I don't mean, I feel like I'm really pushing the point. I'm getting the look like my husband gives me, like, you said enough. I get the message. But, I mean, I'd love to hear from somebody from state properties, like maybe Mr. Stansel.
Well, that's exactly who I'm going to call on to come to the mic and speak.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. As we've gone through this, as the chairman said, we've been doing this for about 18 months. And when you do negotiations, it's give and take. If you remember my job before I came to the State Property Commission, I was the executive director of the Georgia Regional Transportation Authority. The language that we will be in our position will be much stronger than what we've put in what's in the previous lease, okay? This is something that Mr. Camuso was there, and he'll tell you, this was the first thing that we said when we sat down there. As I said, we've got to address commuter rail before we go any further. So we understand very strongly that that corridor needs to have some language in there. If time changes and they run out of highway space and things like that. But we also have to take into consideration how important this section is for ports and making sure that we don't take a freight off, that we put more tractor trailers on that road. We'll be worse off than we are. But I heard you mention the 50-year thing. They started out at 99, we started out at 25, so we kind of came in there. The 50 years has to do with some of their bonding capacity, so we didn't just snatch something out of the air. But I'm not at liberty to go into great detail about this, but I want you to understand that commuter rail option was the number one first thing that we discussed coming out of the chute.
Question. At this point, I'm gonna ask Craig Camuso to come to the podium. Don't leave yet, Senator.
He wanted me to sit down. I'd rather stand. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, first of all, I would like to thank the Properties Commission. We, as Frank had mentioned, we've been involved in negotiation with the state for about the last 18 months, and I thought, too, it would be good just to explain why we've started when we do. In order to, under the law, the state has to give the authority to the Properties Commission, as has been mentioned. At that point, the negotiation will take place, and it'll probably take 6 to 12 months to conduct that negotiation. As Frank had mentioned, there are many, many items that need to be discussed and fettered out. At that point, it has to be approved by the State Properties Commission Board, as well as the Board of Directors of CSX. And then following that, it has to be approved at the federal level by the Surface Transportation Board. So the reason for introducing this and moving it in the 2017 session is 2019 will be here before we know it, and none of these are going to take place week after week after week. There'll have to be some negotiation, obviously, and discussion. What I'd also like to talk about too, and certainly understand and respect Representative Buckner's feelings, and to reiterate what Director Stansel has said. One of the very first things they brought up was the need to protect the corridor in the event that potential leads us to running, or the need to consider commuter rail in the future. And to be quite honest with you, I'm not sure we'd prefer that be the case, but we also understand that this is the state's asset, as Mr. Herring said, and that we do owe that and feel as a responsibility as stewards of that line that will be kept in the lease as it gets negotiated. But one thing I would like to add and give you a few stats about the WNA is its importance to the economic development of not only the northwest part of the state, but really this entire southeast. On average, we run about 31 trains a day down the WNA. We have about 120 customers that we serve that provide thousands and thousands of jobs to the northwest Georgia area. We interchange with one of our branch lines that will ultimately serve the inland port in Chatsworth. We also interchange as you move into Atlanta with our other lines. So if you think about running from I-85 and I-75 and 285, railroad kind of operates the same way. So we've got trains that are not only moving down the WNA, but they are also moving over across to head up towards the East Coast, as well as head down to the west, down to the New Orleans area, and down into the Florida area. So this line provides not only an economic development boom for the citizens of northwest Georgia, but it also provides that for the entire southeast. So it's a very key component of continuing to provide economic development. In addition, we handle about 68 trains a day at our Tilford yard, which the WNA feeds into. So it's a very, very active freight rail corridor, and one that we certainly want to preserve so that we can continue to provide what we believe to be an increasing number of people, as we all know, that are going to be moving into the state, and they will need the very things that CSX and even the other railroads, for that matter, provide and are able to move. So I'll be happy to answer any questions, but I can't assure you that it's been made very clear to us by the state that commuter rail will be a very key component of the lease negotiation.
Thank you for reiterating that. We do have a question, Representative Elam.
Just want to quickly clarify, you definitely said that you would be adverse to putting the commuter rail piece into
Well,
this.
no, not at all. I said if what we do, we work and operate a number of commuter operations in along our 22 state network. We make sure that there are you have to have very key components of that in order for that to work. Number one, it has to be safe. It has to be safe. Number two, there has to be ensured capacity that we're able to continue to operate these 30 trains that we have. There has to be liability when you mix commuter trains and freight trains on one line. That again goes back to the safety issue. And then number four, cost is very much a factor on that. So those are the issues that we consider when we have it. We do have commuter operations in Virginia. We operate Amtrak along our line. We operate the MBTA up in Massachusetts, as well as those in Baltimore. So we certainly have operated commuter operations on our network.
So you're not adverse to the concept?
Not adverse to it, but we also want to make sure that it's that various components are certainly discussed.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions from the committee? Thank you. We have one more individual to speak. Jim Dexter with Citizens for Progressive Transportation, or Transit, Transit. Glad you're here.
Well, thank you very much. I'm glad to be here. And I'm glad that you're seriously discussing the issue of the Western Atlantic Railroad. Maybe somebody can correct me if I'm wrong, but what I'm hearing is that the folks are saying, yeah, we're aware of the commuter rail issue. We'll probably include it in the lease, but the lease is going to be secret until it's signed, and the public will only see it after it's signed. And when that happens, it's done, and there's not much we can do about it for the next 50 years. I think this is a very serious issue. I think commuter rail is coming to Georgia eventually. It's just going to have to. The State Department of Transportation has a commuter rail line. It lists several lines radiating out of Atlanta. All of them will require probably difficult negotiations with the host freight railroads. Of all those lines, we're talking about lines to Athens, to Griffin, to Gainesville, several others. This line, the CSX line that goes from Atlanta through Marietta, it's the only one the state has the advantage of actually owning the rails for. This gives us a special negotiating edge we don't have with any other potential commuter rail line. Now, the instructions that that are being given for the negotiation of this list are quite specific on some things. Specific on the length of the contract, specific on the amount that will be paid, specific even on the amount that the lease payments will increase year after year. I'm hearing that commuter rail, the option for commuter rail, is not considered key to this agreement. In my humble opinion, it's just as key as those other things. I see nothing wrong with an explicit mention, which, as I understand it, that's the last time the legislature is going to be able to have input into this until after the lease is signed, an explicit mention that commuter rail will be considered. Thank you very much.
Do we have any questions of Mr. Dexter? Okay, thank you, Mr. Dexter, and we appreciate that. Do we have anyone else that wants to speak on this issue? Anyone else that wants to speak on this issue? Today is the day that committee members that we have asked a hearing for the hearing here, And if there's any thing else that y'all want to speak on concerning either one of these resolutions, now's the time to do it. Well, guys, this is going better than I thought.
I don't know what else to say. I don't know how to fix it. I don't know what we could do. I don't want to hamper the agreement, and I don't want to be distrustful of our agency folks. But I do feel much like the gentleman that just spoke. It's a very serious thing that once we pass this out, we've lost control over having the say. And I'm a little nervous about it. I'll just tell you, I'm a little nervous about it.
Let me say to the senator and to the committee here, and I can appoint an oversight committee here to be a sort of the watchdog for this, and working with our state properties folks on that. They can keep us informed as to what's going on without interfering with their deliberations, if that's something that we can agree on. And yes, Senator.
Say we are the legislative body of the state, and we do have the authority to intervene in something that we feel like may cause a need for us to do so. The gentleman that just spoke, he is correct in the fact that we at some point in time here in the state, we probably are going to have to look at commuter rail. But that's not the issue that we're addressing today. We're talking about a system that's already in place that is very beneficial to us as a state, because we are preventing commerce, we are enabling commerce to take place currently. And this rail line is very important to us to be able to have things come from the ports that come through Marietta and things of that nature. So this is a economic engine that already exists for us currently, and it's a very important one. And so I would say that while I don't disagree that congestion is a problem here, particularly in the metro area, and it's something that we will, as a body, as a General Assembly, have to address at some point in time. That is an issue that can be addressed down the road. But that's not in the cards for this piece of legislation. But I'm open, if the chairman would like to have an oversight committee. That's fine. I don't think there's anything wrong with having some accountability with any of our agencies. So that being said, I just don't want to hinder progress talking about something that is a future item for us down the road. So,
thank you, Senator. Representative Elam.
I wouldn't want to, knock this off track by any stretch of the imagination, but
Knock it off the track.
No pun intended, Mr. Chairman, I promise. But I just think in my mind, back 50 years, in the 60s, what Atlanta was in the 1960s, and what it's going to be in the 2060s. And I would just be very guarding of the fact that we gave up the capability to have any type of commuter capability. Just
Okay. Representative Buckner.
I am not about undoing the resolution as it is. I understand these conveyances and transfers and all of that are very important. I'm not trying to sidetrack your legislation at all. I do think that it may be that we have certainly tried and probably have made ourselves fairly clear to the agency that we have expectations, And even though we haven't put them in the law, they have been documented by this committee and by the conversation we've had. Now, whether there's any kind of restitution or anything that can be done after the fact if the agreement doesn't contain any of the things we've asked for, I don't know. But I know you said this would be a hearing only, but I'm assuming from what I feel from the fellow members of the committee, we've probably done all we can do by making it very clear that we don't want this lease to come out without at least something that says that it would not prohibit commuter rail if that becomes a need for that section of the state, since that is a very valuable piece of state property that we are allowing to be used for a very lucrative business that helps the state in other ways. I don't know any other way to fix it at this point in time, and I don't want to hold it up for the other communities that need this to happen, but I do hope that that will be contained in that lease.
Thank you, Representative. Representative Donahue.
I think the senator made a good point that it can still come back to us to have the opportunity to make sure that, you know, we are to look at any deals for the future. And if it's something that needs at that time, that it would be okay for us to come back and look at. But if you want to put the wording in there and you feel strong about that, you know, we can always revisit it with that wording in there.
And I'm open to, you know, what the panel, what the committee and what the chairperson would recommend. You know, it's one of those things that they have been working on, and I wasn't involved in the negotiations. You know, I am the messenger in this case. You know, and so I don't know what the talks have been, and won't be involved in the future talks. But I don't. There's nothing that that I've been presented that makes me feel as though state properties or CSX or anybody is trying to hinder any progress that the state may or may not want to partake in down the road. So that being said, I think we're open to suggestions, but currently, as it is written, you know, what you're looking for is not in there. But we, like I said, we are the legislative body of this state, and we do have authority over state properties, and probably would have the ability to bring whoever back to the table if we decided we needed to renegotiate a lease. So that being said, we as a state hold a lot of the trump cards, so to speak. So pardon the pun, but at any rate, but I'm at the mercy of the committee and the chairman. I'll be happy to try to accommodate whatever y'all'd like to do.
Okay, thank you. Representative Perkle.
Thank you, Senator, for that. And I do agree with the language. I think the State Properties Commission has done a tremendous job in pulling this together. I certainly wouldn't want to tie their hands in negotiations. We've made clear, I think, how we feel about making sure our options are open. And I mean, we have to trust the process. We've got these people there for a reason, and I mean, you trust the folks that you brought. If we didn't trust you, we'd get rid of you. And so that's part of the things that I think have been made clear today, that the state property has done a good job, and we want to make sure that our options are open in the lease, and without tying their hands with language that we would put in, which would necessarily tie their hands in negotiation. I think they've done a good job in negotiating the other aspects of this bill as well. So.
All right, thank you, Representative Perkle. You know, I must say right now that I have worked on this committee 34 years, and I have been very fortunate to work with state properties for that long a period of time. The director now, Steve Stansel, has always been right there to assist us, and certainly his two right hands here, whether it's Alicia or whether it's Frank, they have always been right there. And certainly, Craig, I trust you as a professional person who's been at this state capitol a long time, and I take them at their word in that respect. And I would like to see us move forward on this bill tomorrow as it is written, and unless the committee overrides me, I would like to see this the language stay as it is and move forward. And during the interim, I will work to make sure that some of us have some input as far as watching what's going on. I give you my word on that.
I appreciate it. So we're hearing only today, and then we'll
Hearing
come back
only
tomorrow.
today, and
Okay.
you're excused tomorrow. I'm gonna let Representative Perkle
No, okay,
just
good.
present both of them. Those
Hopefully he'll do a better job than what I did.
Well, I think you did a great job on that, and I appreciate you coming. I appreciate the individuals who came today, and certainly we appreciated your input into this. And do we have any other comments? Anything else?
Mr. Chairman, I just appreciate the open conversation that we were able to have about it. Thank you.
That's why we wanted to have the hearing and let everyone have an opportunity to get the message across. And I think that's been a good way in which we have approached it.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Thank you, committee members. I appreciate y'all's time.
Okay.
So thank you.
If nothing else, the committee is adjourned. Debbie, thank you.